Welcome to the 10-Minute Life Lesson Podcast. My name is Jay Cleveland Payne. I train people for improved personal and professional development, offering my assistance to those ready to develop their goals into tangible, focused, and achievable plans of action. And this podcast is one of the tools I use to accomplish my mission. Generally, when the timer hits 9 minutes and 59 seconds on this recording, you'll have a fully developed life lesson that you can take with you and begin to implement immediately. And if this week's lesson has a ring of familiar, then it's probably a reinforcement of a life change you've already started to implement. This podcast falls under the umbrella of my greater personal development efforts, all under the Your Better You brand. For more information on accountability coaching or to gain access to tools, tricks, and life hacks, visit yourbetteryou.info. Thank you for joining me on this journey today. Now, here is this week's life lesson. I produce a lot of audio, a lot of content in general, but a lot of podcasts in particular, and it gets a little hairy. And the best way to handle that is to produce batches of episodes at a time, at least 2, if maybe sometimes the shorter ones 4 or 5 at a time, so I can take a little time to get them edited, get them set aside, and have them ready to go without having to panic every single week as a deadline approaches. That works well for some than others, but it's a practice that I've taken to heart in all this time. I also recycle a lot of content. So if I do a motivational topic from one episode, from one podcast, in a couple of months when I go back and look over what I've done, I can flip-flop the tables and I can do some of the same concepts over again on different podcasts that have different formats and different styles, so I don't burn out on ideas. Today is a prime example of that. I wasn't planning on working on this podcast today, so doing this batch is sort of out of the ordinary. But preparing for another podcast I was going to do, I was working on some pieces for just content, some bits and pieces for Welcome to Your Monday, the messages there. I also wasn't planning on recording on that one today as well, so that's not going to happen. In fact, I'll explain how that works in a second. But I had an idea that was so great that I had to interrupt my schedule for the day, which is busy with the work stuff and the actual production stuff for my podcast business, to make sure I got this message in. And I'm not sure exactly how it was going to fit eventually into the rotation of what I have already done for the 10-minute life lesson. But this was so important that I had to make sure I got it down now as opposed to the future. Now, I don't want to shortchange you on message time. We're not going to run over the 10-minute limit there. So let me quickly get into the background. I have a podcast that started off as a Twitter list called Welcome to Your Monday. In that podcast, every week I present it was a tweet. It's less than 200 characters. Back in the day when Twitter was 140, it had to be less than 140 characters. So it was a very quick message every single week that now has an extension to explain what the message goes to in audio form. Today, I posted the message that will be posted for its originality on April the 12th, 2021. The short messages, so I literally post them a couple at a time, a couple every couple of weeks, and I had my 2 years essentially in the process. But the message today that day will be, history and Hollywood show us glimpses of pioneers overcoming incredible odds to achieve great triumphs. In the moment, the coming triumph are not so obvious. So I didn't want to have to wait 2 years to really dig into that one. So I had this great idea to talk about it. So I'm talking about it right now. And that message boils down to the fact that all great things, when viewed from the lens of history, when viewed from the past, are easy to see. We can easily see how our heroes were fighting the villains of the day and how the tactics they used to overcome them would work out. The problem is, when you're in that moment, when you're living through the history, and it's right now history, it's now the present, the obvious conclusions aren't so obvious. In fact, they seem like they may never happen. And the obvious heroes and villains don't seem so obvious as well. There's a lot of talk in the political rhetoric that we have right now in this situation in 2019 about being on the wrong side of history for various topics, when the problem is we don't really know who the right side of history is. We know this side of history because history is written by the winners of the wars, the people who triumphed from the conflicts, not the people who lost, at least not the major history from people who lost. We've even seen examples of that in modern literature, where rewriting history from a standpoint of this certain views makes a total difference on how things work out. Think of the program The Man in High Castle on Amazon Prime, which writes from an alternate universe where the Axis powers won the World War and are occupying the United States. Half of it controlled by German forces, half of it controlled by Japanese forces, and the whole background. Although there are parallel instances in the world and landmarks and things like that, technology has progressed, but not the same way it would have progressed under different factors and not for the winning sides of the world. This is a world where Germany and Europe are thriving because Germany's there, but back in the States where they're being held down, things are a bit of foot, if you will. But that's how that goes in a fiction area. And there's various editions of alternate fictions where if something else would have happened, how people can sort of guess what they think might have came through. The problem is something else didn't actually happen. We can't go back in time and kill Hitler and see what happens, although that's a very popular subplot of many science fiction and many history books as well. It just can't happen. What progressed to lead us to where we are right now. The problem we have is we look back at history and see how things progressed and assume that because of those things that we're looking forward to now will progress in similar manners. And that's not always the case. Sometimes the bad guys win, but we don't know they're the bad guys till much, much later in the plot. Sometimes the good guys get away with something that they shouldn't have, only to find out that that's only a slight pause, and later on they will get caught in the end. Very often we don't know what the outcomes are, and it's more or less a stagnant life than it is a heroic life. There are many people out there fighting a good fight to do what they can to make the world a better place or just their neighborhoods a better place. They are not guaranteed success, even though most people would readily cheer them on for what they're doing. At the same time, there are plenty of people out there who seem like they are the barriers to the success of people trying to do a good job. But those people are, of course, the heroes in their own story. And the people that back them believe whatever it is they are choosing to fight against or fight for is the right way. So we have issues right now with white supremacy. People who are white supremacists and believe that way probably think that they are really the right way, which is why we have those issues there. We're not going to put all that pushback on that one group of people because there's various people in various different groups, whether a racial group, whether economic group, whatever it is, that believe that their way is the right way and putting their thumb on the scale to make sure that whatever side they're on gets an advantage because they are the good guys is the way to go. You're going to find out when you look back in life, look back a few years, a few decades, maybe a full lifetime, maybe into generations of history from however you look for it, that there'll be plenty of times in your life and the lives of the people that you call heroes where the things they did didn't seem all that heroic, and also the things they pulled off didn't seem like they were going to be pulled off, and the things they progressed didn't seem to be all that great for the time. We all have evolved as a race of humans, as a race of people. There are a lot of things that were in style that are not in style, and they're not just talking about fashion, but fashionable thought. In Christianity, for example, there is plenty of talk in the Bible about slaves and being slaves and the rights of slaves and slaves being able to do what they can do in their different cases. But in this year now, 2019, the thought of slavery, the thought of one person being under the ownage of someone else is a horrible idea. But there are still many people who claim to be Christians to live up to the actual ideas of Christ and God, except for the slavery part. So think about this as you're progressing through your hard work. The people that you see as heroes that history tells us made their way through the greatness, and history tells us that the villains who were able to be defeated ultimately, those weren't determined until after it happened, after history. The work you're doing, I'm sure, is great. I'm sure is awesome. It is not guaranteed, and the actual outcome is not predetermined. Keep working hard because you know that what you're doing should have great consequences, should help people as history goes along. But remember, it's not guaranteed. And it doesn't necessarily look like what the history books show you until after it's done. So your actual goal is to make sure it gets done and to make sure history is told the right way. And to ensure that, you must be the victor to live through the action and tell the story. Thank you for listening to this week's edition of the 10-Minute Life Lesson Podcast. I thank you for putting up with how it sounds wherever it gets placed. As I said, it was a kind of an unusual thing as this is being recorded, not in the batches and going through back and forth on any plan, literally taking object form, another podcast, another piece of content, and wanting to use it right now instead of using it later on as it's scheduled. That will be scheduled well down the line. So if you listen to the Welcome to Your Monday podcast and you have to tune in for the week of 4/12/2021, then you'll hear this all over again. Hopefully a bit more eloquently, since I have 2 years to work on it. In the meantime, this thing will continue as it does, giving you a life lesson, a lesson straight up in 10 minutes, and you can walk away and do something with it. So hopefully you can take the lesson of today, which is to be mindful of where you will stand in history, and that history has not been written yet. So you want to make sure you write it. You've got to be there to write it. Keep up with us at yourbetteryou.info. That is the website for this podcast and the Steps to Your Better You podcast as well. That one's only 90 seconds of quick information. You can email us at yourbetteryouinfo@gmail.com. And you can email me directly at jclevelandpayne.net. I'm sorry, you can email me at jclevelandpayne@gmail.com. jclevelandpayne.net is my website for my main home for stuff. I got a lot of projects going on, so unfortunately I'm just as scatterbrained as I tend to get to when too many things are going through, and just trying to leveling out the playing field on that. We hope to come up with a plan, the group-wise, company-wise in general, and just me specifically on focusing on a couple things. Some things client-wise, some things personal-wise, some things for my own business. So there's less of a craziness in trying to send people to where things are. But you can always find me or something about me at jclevelandpayne.net. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast and being a part of this thing, the full episodes in this life and the past life it was. And make sure you're subscribed to the podcast so that you don't miss out on episodes, and share it with friends. People say rate and review, which are great. We love ratings. We love reviews. We love knowing how you guys feel about it. We love direct feedback on how things are going. But in order to grow the mission and get the message out to more people, we need to find more people. If you can take a few moments to share this podcast with someone like-minded, someone looking to improve on themselves, it'd be greatly appreciated. And, of course, be here next week. I'm not sure what episode will be next, so I'm sure what episode came before this one. But next week, we're pretty sure there'll be another 10-minute life lesson coming to you that you can take away right then and there. From the 10-Minute Life Lesson Podcast, brought to you by yourbetteryou.info.